to the Holly Furtick Book Club. It is Tuesday night and it is my favorite night, and that is when we get to have our book club discussion, and I am so glad that you are here. I cannot wait to talk to you about this book. Now, if you're just joining us, the book that we are reading is, or that we read, the book that we read is Sisters Under the Rising Sun by Heather Morris. And guys, I read a lot of books. Not as many as some of you, but I do read a lot of books. I think I probably average one a week. And it is very difficult for a book to make me cry. This book made me cry or get choked up at least 4 times. And I'm going to tell you about it later. I loved this book and I cannot wait to talk to you about it. And then I cannot wait to talk to Heather about it. She is going to be joining us. This book is a true story. And so you could get spoilers if you just looked at the pictures in the back of the book, because then you would see who survived. So you might just enjoy the discussion and then go back and read the book. It is such an incredible story. It is the story of some Australian nurses during World War II and a couple of other women, well, about 500 other women who find themselves in a Japanese POW camp. And it is a story about the power of female friendships. It is a story about overcoming some of the most horrific situations that you can imagine being in. And the characters in this book are real women. And Heather just truly makes these characters come alive. Porcelain says, I finished it in 3 days. I know. I could not stop listening to this book. So I want to know, let me see, what are my things? Okay, first let's just talk about who are our favorite characters. So I basically narrowed it down to the top 4 characters, and I want to know which one did you just like, you loved her character, you resonated with her. So the first one is Nora. And she's the one who wrote the music. She was like really one of the ringleaders of the women. And she's the one who wrote the music that the women perform like midway through the book. So tell me if you love Nora. The second one that I selected was Margaret. And she's the missionary who, hi, my husband's on. Hey babe, I love you. You're amazing. The missionary who helped Nora with the choir. I think Margaret might have been my favorite. And then the Nesta, who was the tiny nurse, leader. She was the leader of all the nurses, and she was kind of the leader of all the women too. And, I love Nesta. And then I also put down Sister Katharina, who was the leader of the Dutch nuns. So you had these like kind of different groups of women, and they all like find themselves, several of them were shipwrecked. They were women who were the Australian nurses. Remember, they were stationed in, Indonesia, and they were being evacuated, and the Japanese bombed their ship, and they end up being POWs for the majority of the war. Okay, here's what you guys are saying. Miss Manda says, I loved Nesta. Renee says Nesta was her favorite. Nora was a close second. Porcelain says Nesta. Lindsay Franklin says Nesta. Liz is reading. Hi, Liz. Liz says Nesta. Lisa Hughes says she cannot pick. Emily says yes, the nuns. Karen says Nora was her favorite for sure. I mean, these women were like absolute gems. And I can't wait to hear more about Heather and how she found these women and selected these women. I know you want to know all that too. Okay. I just want to tell you before, and you can chime in at like the parts that really touched you, but there were 4 times during this book that I cried, and I'm going to tell you those 4 times. Okay. The first time that I cried was the first concert. And I don't know if you didn't do the audiobook. I don't know if you clued into that it was like an orchestra piece that the women were singing. So there was no words. And in the audiobook was insane, because in the audiobook, they actually put there's like an Australian women's choir that has gone back and recorded these, because they have the music. Actually, I mean, if you can read sheet music, and you wanted to, it's in the back of the book. Hold on. I'm going to show it to you. Look, here is the actual sheet music that Nora hand wrote. And so Gail just joined. She says, what book are we talking about? We're talking about Sisters Under the Rising Sun. So in the voices were the instruments. And in the audiobook, they played it. And when I heard that for the first time, I just started crying. I was like, oh my gosh, like these women are under the worst circumstances, types of circumstances where you would just want to lay down and die. And here they are spending what little free time that they have huddled around humming this music. It was incredible. So if you didn't do, okay, Laura McCarty, she says, now I need to get the audiobook. Okay, I will put the link in my email tonight. I'm going to play it for you. This might like sound really terrible, but just, I don't know. I just feel like those of you who read the book but didn't like catch on to this is what the choir sounds like. Okay, can you hear this? This is on my YouTube and they're singing Bolero. And okay, I'm just gonna be quiet for a second. Where's the choir that's singing? Okay, so the first time that I heard that, I don't know, it just brought tears to my eyes to just think about these women and their voices and the power of music and how it can help you to overcome even the worst of situations, even if it's just for a moment. Okay, so that was the first time I cried. The second time I cried was when the nurses came home from the war and how everybody treated them and how there were like flowers for blocks and blocks and blocks and so many flowers that the whole country or the whole town of, I think Perth, they all showed up with the flowers and I just bawled. Okay. The third time that I cried was when I read the author's note, because also in the audiobook, when Heather reads her author's note, she doesn't read the audiobook, but she reads the author's note. She gets choked up talking about these women. And so then I got choked up listening to her talk about these women that I just read a whole book about. So, and then this is the funniest one. So the fourth time that I got choked up during this book was when I went into my husband, because I always, bless his heart, I always tell him about my books, even if they're bad. I'm like, this book is so terrible. Listen to what it's about. And he always listens and he always asks me because he's a really great husband. And so I was trying to tell him about these women. I'm like, and they're in this POW camp and they're starving and the Japanese guards are beating them and raping them. And this woman starts a choir and when they start singing, and I kid you not, I couldn't keep talking. I started crying, trying to tell him about these women singing. So at that point I was like, this is going to be book club. And I really hope that we can get a hold of Heather Morris because we have to get her on here so that we can talk about this story. Hello, Heather.
Hello. Look, I'm so sorry. I'm just not the most techie person in town.
It is no problem. I'm so glad that it worked and that you're here. And first of all, thank you for the work that you put into this story because like I said, I mean, this one really got to me. It really touched me. And
thank you.
It's just really beautiful.
Well, look, can I please say a big warm hello from Brisbane to you, Holly, personally, and thank you for this wonderful opportunity to talk to you and the incredible people who I'm seeing these wonderful messages come up for you.
Yes.
So thank you for having me here with you this evening, your time.
We're so excited. It's like 10 o'clock in the morning, your time, right?
Yes.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, my day's about to begin.
Okay, so I always love to ask my authors to just start off by reading a selection from the book. Do you have a selection that you like to read out loud?
Yeah, look, I will. I thought that quite a few of the people on here tonight have already read it. Look, thank you. It's wonderful. I do appreciate it. But for those who haven't, I will read it. I'm going to read the prologue because, as my editor says, you're not giving anything away then. But actually, I quite like giving away spoilers. Just stay tuned.
We totally do spoilers on this book club because most of the people that are on have actually read the book.
Okay.
But you read the prologue.
Right, look, I'll just do the prologue. Singapore, February 1942. Nora Chambers sits on Sally's bed, waiting for her daughter to wake up. The conversation that follows is the most painful of her life, telling her of the decision she and husband John have made to send Sally away with her Aunt Barbara and cousins is received just as she expected. She holds on tight to her distraught little girl, desperate to stay with her mum and dad, crying that she will not leave them, not now, not ever, even when her two cousins burst into the room full of the news that they are about to embark on an adventure and sail the seas, no less. Sally barely registers their presence. "Sally, we're going to Australia," they chant, "on a big ship." Singapore is falling. What choice does Nora have? John is in hospital with typhus. As soon as he is better, they will follow, she promises Sally. On the car journey to the wharf, Sally doesn't stop crying, her face turned away from her mother to the window. Nora's attempts to comfort her are shrugged off. As they walk to the boat, Sally wraps her small arms tight around her mother's waist. It's going to be hard to let go for either of them. An explosion nearby only compounds their fear, the terror of what lies ahead, and Sally's cries erupt into petrified screams. Nora is frozen, numbed by the horror of what she is witnessing, the distress she is causing the most precious person in her life. As the world explodes around them, Barbara swiftly lifts Sally into her arms and runs to the waiting gangplank. "Daddy and I will be right behind you. Be a good girl, my darling. We'll be with you in a few days, I promise," Nora screams after her daughter. Sally continues to sob, her arms reaching for her mother. Nora takes an involuntary step forward, only to have her younger sister Ina grab her arm and pull her away. They watch as Barbara and Sally disappear onto the deck and out of sight. There will be no happy waving from the boat or the dockside from either mother or daughter. Will I ever see her again? Nora cries.
And so right from the beginning, you rip our hearts out.
Yes, but as you have already pointed out, that in the back of the book, there are photos. And I encourage people before they read my books to look at the photos. They get a feel for who these people really were. They get to see this young Sally as that young girl in Malaya before she fled. And by seeing the music, you know that I have found Sally, that 8-year-old girl I met many times on the island of Jersey where she lived. And it was her who gave me that music written by her mother 80 years ago in the jungles of Sumatra, perfectly remembered and written. And I've held many, many of those pages. You get to see 2 of them.
I mean,
and when I hold them, Polly, I held them and all I could do was weep. Because you're saying to yourself, who held these pages? Was it Margaret who held this? Was it Nesta? Was it Vivian? Who held this page, and what did it do to them when they held that page of classical music? But yeah, very powerful.
so powerful. I mean, just incredible that you were able to not only get your hands on this story and find these characters and be able to interview their relatives and get a hold of these like actual relics that they had a part in, but then to be able to retell it in a way that didn't feel confusing and didn't feel overwhelming. It was just incredible. So take us back to the beginning, because you wrote your first book, or you published your first book about 20 years ago. So what were you doing before that? And what brought you to this, to being this type of author?
Well, actually, Holly, I published my first book only 6 years ago. I got the story 20 years ago, but it existed as a screenplay because I wrote it that way for many, many years. And it was only in 2018 that I got it published as a novel. That's The Tattooist of Auschwitz.
Yes, okay, I read 2003, and I thought, well, that book's older than I thought it was. So 2003 was when you wrote the screenplay?
Yeah, that's when I met Lali Sokolov, and that's when I got the story.
Okay.
Was between those years, 2003 and his death in 2006. So I had the story, but nobody else really saw it. I was trying to flog it, but nobody was picking it up. So it was not until 2018 that I finally got my first book published at retirement age, the age of 65.
Wow.
I became an author.
So you write this. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, but coming back to your question, I had written to The Tattooist of Auschwitz and 2 other Holocaust stories. And when the third one was about to go to the printers, your job's done now for this point anyway.
Right.
You don't come back into being involved in it until it is being released. And my publisher said, "What do you want to write now?" And I said, "Look, I don't want to do another Holocaust story. I need something else." And she said to me, "There's a story I know about of Australian nurses. Why don't you look into it? They were prisoners of war of the Japanese." So I started having a little look at it down here in Australia, just about the nurses. And one day I was having lunch with a couple of my ex-colleagues. I worked in a large hospital here in Melbourne in social work. I'm having lunch with these two gals and they go, "Hey, you're my vintage and you were educated here." I'm from New Zealand. I was educated and brought up there. And so I did not know the story of the Aussie nurses. So I asked two of my friends who were educated here. And one of them just casually said to me, "Oh, Nesta James was my second cousin. I know her story. I know their story. What do you want to know?" I'd found that one thing I need to tell a story, a personal connection.
So that was the spark that you knew, all right, this is my next project.
Yeah. And so I started delving into it, thinking I'm only going to tell the story of the nurses.
Yeah.
But everywhere I read, and I got lots and lots of documents from the Australian War Museum, from a few other testimonies, a couple of Vivian Bullwinkle, one of the characters, she had had an autobiography. The same with Betty Jeffries, had done a small autobiography. But we're talking some 50, 60 years ago.
Right.
And so they've now not been heard of for, 2 generations virtually. But one name kept popping up in every book I read or every document I read from the Aussie nurses. And you nailed it. It was Nora Chambers, Nora Chambers, Nora Chambers. So of course I had to find out about Nora Chambers. And that's when I found young Sally, an 87-year-old lady, and got to spend time with her and get her mum's side of the story. So I've got the Aussie nurses and other nurses' families here in Aussie. And then I found Nora's family.
Okay, so it took you, okay, wait, and let me see if I'm doing my math right. 2003 to 2018 to publish The Tattooist of Auschwitz. Yeah. So that's like 15 years. Yeah. All right. So now this is your 4th book kind of in this style, but not the first 3 books are like, they're sort of like a series. They're like spin-off characters of each other, right? Because I read the first 2. I haven't read the 3rd one yet because I actually got confused because they both had the word sisters in them. So I thought they were 6 books.
I'm sorry about that, but we couldn't come up with, we had to have that word. And once again, because as you said, their survival was based on them being a sisterhood.
Absolutely.
But also, Nora's there with her biological sister, Ina. The nurses, they were called Sister James. Sister Bullwinkle, Sister Jeffries, it was a phrase, and until they were there for a little bit and they started reverting to their first names. And the Dutch nuns were, of course, being also called Sister Katerina. So that word,
brilliant. I mean,
didn't have a choice really.
The title is brilliant. So how long did it take you to do this research? What was your process like? So you have this story, then you have this spark, a connection, then you find Sally and you start interviewing her. How long was it, and how did you begin to outline the story before you knew that you were ready to start writing it?
Probably about 6 months of really intensive research. And that includes, by the way, going and meeting the families. I found more family members of Nesta's in Cardiff in Wales. They'd gone back there because Nesta had originally come from Wales. So I was able to go there and then spend more time with these 2 elderly aunts. They were first cousins of Nesta's, 2 sisters well into their late 80s. And so you gather it all together and just see where the story for me, I hear it and I see the story playing out in front of me. And I read once an American screenwriter called William Goldman. He used to write stories based on little snippets of information that he found and create a story around it. And he said that he wrote his stories by research, research, research. Now throw the research away and write the thing.
Okay.
And so after I've got everything that I've read, and by the way, I get to a point where I actually stop. I only want to read about these nurses. I don't want to read about any other prisoner of war camp. I don't want to read about what other people have written about it. I find the personal stories, testimonies, statements, affidavits, audiobooks, audios, and stay with them. because I don't want to confuse my little brain with people and what happened to them in other camps and other times. And then it is a matter of when I've got it all in my head, I just sit down and write, and I push all that research away. Because if I don't have it up here, then how can I expect you to follow it?
And so 6 months of really intense research, interviews, reading, finding relics in libraries and all of that. Then how long, once you start writing, how long did it take you to get your first draft?
But I was getting behind in that, and my publishers in London, it was getting towards the end of, it must have been 2021, no, 2022. So my publisher said to me, come on, you're in Brisbane, the sun's shining there, it's summer, you've got grandkids there, we need you to go somewhere else. So they sent me to an apartment in Soho in London in the middle of winter there for 2 months, and in those 2 months I wrote it.
You just pounded it out.
I pounded it out, which wasn't easy when you're living in Soho, because you've got West End and every theatre in London within walking distance. You've got all the wonderful shops. But it did work.
So was there any point, can I just tell you something really funny, like commercial break? My dog has come into the room and he smells like he's been outside, and he smells terrible. He smells like he has been rolling around in deer dung, and it smells so bad in my office right now.
Well, thankfully we don't have smell-o-vision yet.
There you go. Okay. So this is more of a serious question, but when you are in the midst of such a heavy story and a heavy situation, how does it affect you? Do you have to take breaks? Do you have to stop? Do you have dreams about these women?
Look, you're probably quite accurate when you talk about dreams about them. You don't have the same good quality sleep for 2 months. Yeah. I'll say that, because yes, you do. I do anyway. Wait during the night thinking about it. But then, because I like to actually work at night, I quite often start a long writing session about 9 o'clock at night and go through to about 2 or 3 in the morning. Because at that point, all the shops are shut, the shows have closed, and there's no distractions. And I am a night person, so I can work very well. But, I took the power of the music that Nora created, and I let music get me through it.
Wow.
I got to say up here, I cannot read one note of music. And it bothered me when I then had to describe to potentially readers who did understand music. How can I get across to you the power of the classical music that Nora, created that vocal orchestra from?
Yeah.
But I hope I did okay, and I just think that Nora somehow was telling me what words to put on the page to make it understandable by people who do not have a musical bone in their body. But we all love music, don't we?
I mean, that's right. It's powerful. That's what touches us, and I think that's why, even though you may not be able to completely grasp it when you're reading the story, you understand the power of music and how it can bring people together, and how it can transform your whole outlook on your situation. Yeah. And I think I could just feel that in the story. Okay, so I heard you say that you were talking about like how you were able to take 500 women and I forget how many children, 40 children or something. Yeah. And you've researched all these characters, and you've sort of gone, okay, these are my central women, Nora and Nesta and Margaret. How did you then be able to, how do you weave fact and fiction together?
Look, that's the challenge, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because everything that you will read in the story factually happened, but it may not have happened to the person that I gave that vignette or that storyline to.
Okay.
And I have in the back of my author's notes, I'm always very, very clear that there were so many other women here that are not named individually, because you can imagine you can't name them all and expect a reader to follow.
Right.
And I apologise profusely for having to take vignettes or storylines that happened to somebody else, because they were so important to me, and give them to a person who that didn't happen to. And so I acknowledge that. And that's probably about the best you can do, is make that very clear to readers, that you have not taken advantage, you have used storylines from other people. And I give a lot of their names in the back as well.
Mm-hmm.
These are people not mentioned, but you need to know their names just the same.
I thought it was really brilliant, the way that you were able to weave the story together, because obviously there are all these little stories that you read in museums about people, but to be able to, their story does live on, even though it's happening through other characters. I heard you say somewhere that when they made the recipe book, that was like a different group of women that had made the recipe book, but you made it, was it the nurses that made the recipe book?
No, it was the English women, because there was this conflict. There's a dish down here in Australia and New Zealand that we fight over who it was who invented it. It's called the pavlova. And so I knew it was the English woman who decided to do the recipe book. And they came to the Aussie nurses to say, well, what's your national dish? And they said the pavlova, and we'll give you the recipe. And they said, well, you can't have that because the New Zealand girls have already pinched it as theirs. So yes, anything to try and distract themselves from the squalor that they were living under. Have a newsletter until they ran out of paper. Make a recipe book.
And it's
anything.
All these little moments that are like really give the story so much life. Do you ever have people criticize you for making dialogue out of factual characters? Because I just think there's a really fine line between fiction and nonfiction. You know, my husband always jokes, because I love a really good memoir. And he's like, you know, that's just somebody's made up version of what happened to them. It's their fictionalized account of what happened to them. So you know what I mean? Like, it's a very fine line. And here you are taking something that is true, but you're putting dialogue to it. Do you ever have people who say, you know, I don't know, who criticize that?
Look, there are clearly historians and academics are not happy about it when you're writing about real events and you choose to tell it in the way that I do. But if I'm going to get millions of people reading the story because I've chosen to make it more relevant in terms of the dialogue and conversations and creating the pictures around, the words that, I mean, for example, Vanessa, I was given a 2-hour audio tape that was made by her when she first came back in 1946. And I got to hear her voice. I got to hear the words that she used. So why wouldn't I want to use those same words and those same tone and put that into the story? But for me, life is about conversations. It's not about just reading lots and lots of prose and heavy descriptions. So you're never going to get lots of long literary sort of descriptions of the colour of the sky and the shades of the trees and the mingling of the flowers. I don't do that for you. I'm going to tell you that the sun's out in the daytime. Work it out for yourself. But I'm going to now tell you what's being said between those women.
And you just do it so brilliantly. I mean, I almost felt like I was there with them in my air-conditioned car.
Oh, how I would have loved that. But look at it. Look, what I love about this story is that, as you said, so many things happened to these women which were in many ways joyous and uplifting. And you mentioned Margaret Dryburgh. The whole reason that choirs started being formed and ultimately Nora created her vocal orchestra, it was because Margaret was still holding church services on a Sunday morning. And the number of women attending them was dwindling all the time. But even those who weren't going to the church services found themselves wandering up to where it was, not to hear Margaret per se, but she knew at some point Margaret would have the women sing a hymn.
Yeah.
And so it was the singing of those hymns on the Sunday mornings that the other women said, well, can we have other singing? And a couple of choirs got formed, and ultimately they all were singing, as you've read, the national anthems of Australia, the Netherlands and England. Well, not England, because England and Australia had the same national anthem at the time.
Okay.
So the poor English lady, well, the Aussie nurses got it first, and so they came up with their own.
So one of the things that I love to ask authors is, when you were done writing the book, who was the character that that you really missed the most? And I think it's an interesting question to ask you because your characters were actually real life people. So maybe I would change it to say, if you could bring one of them back to life and meet one of the women that you represent in the book, which one would it be?
I can answer that, and it's one you haven't mentioned.
Okay.
And it's Mrs. Hinch.
Oh, she?
You're one and only American.
Oh, okay.
The
I'm
commandant.
trying to refresh my memory about her.
Mrs. Hinch, she was the only American in the camp, and they made her the camp commandant. So she was the one that had to interact with the Japanese interpreter and translator. The only woman in that camp that was never referred to by her Christian name. She was Mrs. Hinch the entire time. Not Nesta and Vivian and Nora and Nina, Mrs. Hinch.
So why her?
Because I just found I probably couldn't get enough in there about her into the book that I wanted to. She just seemed such a formidable woman, and she had that overarching calmness to her that held all the other women looked up to.
Mm-hmm.
But here's the wonderful thing. After the book came out, I got an email from a lady who lives in New Mexico, and she said, I am Mrs. Hinch's granddaughter. And I subsequently last year, no, it was early this year in January, I was in the States, I was in San Diego, and she and her husband drove over from New Mexico to San Diego to spend the day with me. And so I now got to hear more about Mrs. Hinch's life post the war.
That's incredible. All right, one of my favorite, I guess it's a quote, it's at the very end of the book, and I think it might be in your author's note, and you give this little bit of information. You say, you're citing somebody's research, and you say the morale of women at the time of their liberation was much higher than that of the men in their camps. Perhaps
Yes.
The women were more adaptable or had greater inner resources than the men because they seemed to withstand the rigors of imprisonment more stoically. What do you think that it says? I'm actually working on a Bible study about the importance of friendship. What do you think we can learn from these women about friendship? Because when I read that quote, I'm like, I think it's the power of, like you said, sisterhood. But what do you feel like we can learn from these women as women today?
Actually, I think as women, we've got it already. And you're referring to the men, we know this, and I wrote that short little sentence in there about the men, because in the 1960s, a researcher here in Australia who could still contact some of the nurses was still alive, and they'd done some stats on, as a percentage, who had survived, the better. And she looked at that, and because the names, unlike the Germans, the Japanese did not keep lists of names.
Okay.
And so to have the names of all those women, it doesn't exist. But the women who survived, of course, are able to say the names of all those that were there and the ones who didn't survive. And the men, she found men and compared, well, they started off at 300 and they ended up with only over 100 still alive after 3.5 years. Whereas the women, they, as a percentage, far, far fewer of them actually died. But that researcher went and looked into why was that? And that's when the women, the nurses, the English women and the Dutch women, she found that those who were there explained to her, well, it was because it was, one for all for one. We cared for everyone. Nobody was being left behind. And when she then asked the men who had survived, what was it like in the men's camp? How did you as a group cohere? And she was told very clearly that in that men's camp, there were senior officers of the army from England and also Australia. There were men there that had run big companies in Malaya and Singapore who boasted, I had 500 people working for me. I know how to do things. And then there were the men there that were the younger soldiers or did not have a rank. And those who thought they knew how to run the camp tried to run it their way. And so they were continually, the men could not come together and form any kind of connection as a group as a whole. As many of the men said, I looked after me and maybe my best mate. Wow. There was no community feel or no community gathering, all for one for all in the men. A very sad indictment, I suppose, on men at the time, that they were either in a position of power or they weren't. And under those circumstances, those who did not have the power in the outside world, they pretty quickly said, no, I'm not going to do as you tell me. Why? We're all prisoners. So there was the difference between men and women.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting to see what you come up with if that still exists. to that level anyway.
Yeah, I don't know. I just know personally that there have been times in my life where it was the women who supported me that really got me through. And I think that we live in a world where there's a lot of pseudo connection through social media. And
Yep, what we're doing now.
yeah, well, we're talking face to face.
Absolutely, exactly.
But I think that there is a lot of like fake connection too in just commenting and posting and thinking, you know, if I post that I have a bad day, then people will comment and but rather than like actually talking to a friend about it. And so
absolutely,
I think that the power of community actually going through a situation together and sisterhood in particular is crucial to your survival and to thriving as a woman, as a wife, as a mother. And that's why I love this book. I mean, it is my favorite thing to read about is female friendships, because I think they're powerful. And so I'm just so grateful for you to get a hold of this story and really persevere, because I know that there had to be moments where it was tough to figure out how you were going to tell the story.
Absolutely. Yeah, how can you write about the evil and horrific things these women were enduring in a way that gets it across to a reader, but not so bad that they don't want to turn the page because they can't read anymore.
Right.
And in all my books, that has been, you know, the major challenge. I want the reader to keep turning the page. Now, I mentioned to you in the beginning that I wrote Lully's story as a screenplay. And one of the things I learned about writing that, well, the most important thing for me, because it was easily adapted into my books, was the power of changing the emotional arc of the story you're telling. Do not have everybody laughing the whole time. Do not have everybody crying the whole time. You must constantly change the emotion you want your reader to experience. And that's not easy when you're writing books like this.
Oh.
But those friendships, those bonds between Nora and Ina, between Ina and little June, they then provided that change in emotional arc towards the evil and the horror that the Japanese were inflicting on the women. So you have to pace it, and that's what I go looking for. But in writing a story like this, and Holocaust stories, is that you don't get to mess with the timeline. These things happened during this timeline, so you've got to find a way to make sure you fit them in.
Wow. Well, thank you.
The emotional arcs. And once again, is that something that we as female can acknowledge and recognize quite quickly? If somebody's up or somebody's down, or somebody needs a hug, or do they need to have a laugh?
And men they're not always quite as in tune and aware of that.
No, or even if they are, they're not going to show it. Whereas we're going to show it.
Well, brilliantly done. And everything that you just said about taking me on the emotional ride, you accomplished just brilliantly. So
thank you.
Any little hint that you want to give us to what you're working on now or next?
I'm actually working on 2 stories kind of at once, which is going to be interesting. One is a little bit more contemporary, but all my stories I will ever write are based on something that happened to either somebody else, or in this case, actually something that happened to me or that I was on the periphery of. And I saw this incredible thing playing out over a period of many months. So it is set in contemporary times, and it is set in a hospital.
Okay.
I worked in a hospital for over 20 years. Oh, my goodness. There's one thing I know, and here's a bit of a hint, is that there are no braver people in the world than the parents of a child with a terminal illness.
Okay.
I'll say no more.
Well, I'm in. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming on, and thank you for really putting out such beautiful stories into the world that change us and inspire us and encourage us. And so many of the people who are on, we loved it so much. So thank you.
You're welcome. And if I can do probably a throw out there to anyone watching who wants to see the best miniseries made this year, then The Tattooist of Auschwitz 6-part series. I think it's on Peacock in the States.
Okay.
I'm so proud of that incredible production.
Okay.
And,
I forgot that it was out, and I literally told my husband tonight, I was like, we have to watch that show. So it's at
Harvey Keitel playing Lully as an old man is absolutely brilliant. The music by Hans Zimmer is out of this world. And if you stay listening at the end of episode 6, when it cuts to the credits, you will hear an original song being sung by Barbara Streisand, who for the first time ever is singing for a television show and also a production that she's never not been involved in. So heavily did she feel about this story. She wanted to be part of it.
We're going to watch. I'm going to put it in my email and remind everyone to watch it too. So
go to YouTube, put in Barbara Streisand, Love Will Survive is the name of the song.
Okay. Thank you, Heather, so much. So nice to meet you, and thanks for joining us today.
My absolute pleasure.
Okay.
All right, folks.
Okay, bye. We'll
Have a wonderful evening.
No, you too. Well, guys, that was an incredible discussion. I truly don't know how I get to talk to so many amazing, brilliant authors. And if you enjoyed Sisters Under the Rising Sun and you're not a part of the Holly Furtick Book Club, I don't know what you're waiting for, because if you sign up for the emails, that's all you have to do to join. Sign up for the emails. I promise I won't spam you, and I will let you know what we're reading and when we're meeting live so that you can join us for the discussion. And if you liked this book and you like this discussion, let me know in the comments. Also, let me know if you've read anything that you think I would like or you think our book club might like. I always love seeing all of your comments. So like, share, subscribe, and I will see you back here